Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So we are walking through the book of 2 Peter. We've come to 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 10. Last time we went through verses 7 to 9, where we really talked about Lot's deliverance, how God can deliver the godly and reserve the wicked to judgment. We also talked about how that was really a type of the church, Lot's deliverance from Sodom, but didn't press that to the max or anything. But anyways, today we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the corruption of these false teachers. Remember, the context that we're talking about is false teachers that are going to try to take advantage of those in the church. So in verses 10 to 16, Peter expands on their corruption. Now, in order for us to kind of get a little bit of context here, we won't take a lot of time in it, but chapter 1 is dealing with spiritual maturity, because if you're spiritually mature, then or you're at least maturing, you won't typically be subject to being fooled by false teachers, because they prey on what Peter calls really unstable souls and people that are immature in their faith, which is why we need to also watch over those that are young in the faith, because babes in Christ have a tendency to believe everything that they hear from anybody that they think is close to a Christian. Not all babes have discernment. Some have the gift and, will kind of catch things right away. They won't know why they feel uncomfortable with something, but they will hear something or somebody will share something with them, and then they'll say, I didn't know what was wrong, but I just didn't feel comfortable. And then they'll tell you, and you'll say, well, the reason was, and you can tell them. But in order to get just a little bit of the context for starting verse 10, we'll back up to verse 9. So in verse 9 of 2 Peter 2, Peter says, "The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment." And then verse 10, "And especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority." So this word especially is especially important. And it's translated chiefly in the King James Bible, and it means most of all, above all, or particularly. So it is particularly those who walk according to the flesh, right? In the lust of uncleanness and despise authority that God is going to judge. Vines tells us that the word is used as a superlative, something to the max, basically, of the adverb for this word especially, and it means very, very much in a lot of Greek literature. So we're talking about especially, or like, this is the most, very, very much in this case, those who walk and in this lust, or the evil lust of uncleanness and despise authority. So because of the destructive nature of these false teachers, God is reserving a punishment for them. This is not the side of the fence you want to be on. But he is particularly preparing a punishment for those false teachers who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. Now, not every single false teacher is of the same caliber. Obviously, some are worse than others morally, though they are all liars and deceivers, because they are telling people something that is false to gain something from them, for which they'll give an account on Judgment Day. In other words, for their personal advantage that they receive in this life through the deception and the deceptive ways of merchandising God's people, like Peter talked about in the first few verses, they will pay a heavy eternal price for this. This is not the place where anybody should be toying with God's people. Now, their lust and their greed have blinded them to the reality of their accountability to God. Now, this happened oftentimes in the Old Testament, which is why we can read in Psalms and in Proverbs, there are verses that relate to the wicked, and even in, I believe it's Jeremiah, I should have looked it up, but it talks about where people think that God can't see them in their wickedness because they do it in the darkness, like God needs a flashlight to be able to see them. But this is a common problem among the wicked. They have no sense of their accountability to God. Their conscience obviously is damaged and hardened, so that they, their own personal greed and lust is overshadowing any sense of accountability that they're going to have when they stand before God. Now, let's be realistic. We're all sinners. None of us are perfect, which is why we need Jesus Christ. However, when you're doing, for lack of a better term, when you're doing business for Jesus, in other words, you're dealing with his people that he paid a heavy price for, that he redeemed, that really we have, especially as pastors, we have no claim to. They are not there for our benefit and our control or anything like that. But when you start dealing with them in that way, that's dangerous ground. And, I know some people I believe are saved that have started to wander down that road. But it's a very, very dangerous road, because the people on it are typically unsaved people that are destined to an eternal destruction, as Peter is talking about, to damnation. But, and again, that doesn't mean that they can't repent. If they're still here, they can repent, and they can turn from the damage that they're doing. In other words, they don't need to continue down that road. But this sin has a blinding effect. Once we, Paul talks about in Romans 6 about how to Christians now, if you yield yourselves to righteousness, then you will not be sinning. If you yield yourselves to sin, then there's a corruption. Now, when he talks about yielding yourselves, or in the New King James, I think he uses a word, it's translated, present yourselves, the members of your body. In other words, the moral control of our body, God has given us the ability, being freed from the power of sin through the cross and our identification of that. When we are born again, we have the capability of saying no to sin. Now, the problem is, if I say yes to sin, I become its slave. Now, I'm either going to be a slave to righteousness if I submit to that, or if I submit to sin, I become a slave to sin. Because, in principle, whoever I submit to, I am their slave. And this is what Paul brings up in Romans 6. I would recommend that you read it, because it really is talking about sanctification. But when these people submit themselves to this corruption and this wickedness and this evil, it's where they're targeting God's people for personal advantage. It is even more egregious, and any sense of accountability to God goes out the window. So now, only God knows the countless lives that have been destroyed by these deceivers. In the end, none of the temporary benefits, I believe they will consider worth it in their eternal misery, but for some reason it doesn't change the course in a lot of these false teachers that we have seen throughout church history, and many of which are alive and active, unfortunately, today. But they're taking advantage of believers, and it draws the particular attention of Jesus Christ because he purchased believers with his own blood. He didn't go to the cross so that false teachers could come in and take advantage of this captive audience and use them for their own wicked ends. And I think that it goes unnoticed many times by these false teachers. Hebrews 10:31, where it says, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." Not a place where you want to be. Now, isn't it interesting, as believers, being safe in the hands of God is such a comfort for us as believers, but these unbelieving false teachers trying to take advantage, those same hands become something to be fearful falling into. So here in the verse, this word uncleanness is really talking about some kind of moral pollution, corruption, crime, or scandal. And it's interesting that pollution, corruption, crime, and scandal seem to surround many false teachers' lives. And it's a defilement. These teachers are defiled by these things that they do, but it is a result of their action. So they take certain actions, they do different things, their behavior and everything else, and then the result is that they end up in some kind of corruption and scandal because of it. Now, the word dignitaries, the dignitaries that are spoken of, that they speak evil of, appear to be angelic beings from the context of the following verse, which we'll get into, though it can mean, human beings that have been vested with governmental authority by God. In other words, it can mean that, but the context really seems to focus on angelic beings, because verse 11 says, "Whereas angels, who are greater in power and might, do not bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord." Now, this verse, along with what Jude says, because remember, Jude, the little book of Jude written by Jesus' half-brother, it really aligns very much with chapter 2 of 2 Peter. So Jude basically says, in his little letter, something that provides more of a picture for us. He says in Jude verse 8, it's only one chapter, "These dreamers defile the flesh." Peter's telling us the same thing. "Reject authority and speak evil of dignitaries." Again, same thing Peter's telling us. Now, where Peter says, "Whereas angels who are greater in power and might don't bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord," Jude says, "Yet Michael, the archangel," now there's only one archangel, it is the, even in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, with the definite article the, so he is the archangel. So Jude says, "Yet Michael, the archangel, in contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses," apparently the devil wanted it, "dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" In other words, Michael wasn't rebuking the devil. He was saying, "The Lord rebuke you, not me." But Jude goes on and says, "But these speak evil of whatever they do not know." In other words, these people have no clue to what they're playing with. "And whatever they do know naturally, like brute beasts," in other words, like just crazy wild animals, in these things they corrupt themselves. So it's interesting because false teachers have a tendency to delight in shocking people by their belligerent denunciation of dignitaries. Now, the word for dignitaries in the Greek is glories or glorious ones, which is why I really think the real focus is on, angelic beings. However, it doesn't discount that it could be governmental authorities, right? And the reason that governmental authorities could weigh into that is because in Romans 13 we find out that all governments are established and given their authority to function by God. So, and this is an interesting thing, not that we're going to get into Romans 13, but if God provides the government, the human government, with authority, then he's the authority above it. If they cease to function, right, as his authority, now we're supposed to submit to governments as long as they're doing what God intends for them to do. Now, if they tell us to do something against what God tells us, well, God's the higher authority, right? So we see that in the book of Acts with Peter and the apostles. They're before the Sanhedrin. They're telling them not to preach in Jesus' name. And Peter says, hey, whether it's right in the sight of God for you to not obey God, you judge that. But hey, for us, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Like you can't tell us not to do what God's telling us to do, right? Certainly governments can have laws that allow wickedness and evil. I mean, even under the Roman government that Paul was under when he wrote Romans 13, certainly allowed a lot of wickedness and evilness to have some capability of being affected. And Rome had a lot of laws. They were kind of like our government where, they had a tremendous legal system and everything. But at the same time, the people that were running the Roman government were not saints. So Paul's point would be, hey, if they're telling you to pay taxes, you pay taxes. We don't like all the things that governments tell us to do, but as long as it's not contradicting what God tells us to do. In other words, if the government says, hey, you can't preach the gospel anymore, well, yeah, we wouldn't have to listen to the government on that. But if the government says, hey, all of a sudden certain drugs are legal that make you high and, you're not under the control of the Holy Spirit anymore, well, though the government may say that that's okay, the Bible doesn't say that that's okay. So now, if the government said you have to get high, well, that would be a different story. It's not saying you have to. It's just allowing it. So, in a lot of states, they've, allowed marijuana and other drugs for, recreational use so that people can just, drive high and be more dangerous. And it's crazy. But, look, these states, they enact these laws for money because they think they're going to get tax money because they're neck deep in trying to get funds out of the back of a lot of these, these cannabis companies. But at the same time, they're doing that. They're also farming out a bunch of tax dollars, which they're taking in to try to create programs for the people that are all messed up on drugs that can't work and pay taxes. You almost can't make it up. Sometimes, there's an old saying that you can't fix stupid. Well, you can't fix moral stupidity either. And that's kind of what it boils down to. But anyways, Peter's point here is that angels that are greater in power and might don't even blaspheme other glorious beings, right? In that way, taking like this authority to themselves. Now, Michael, the archangel, won't do it. So, who do these people think that they are? But false teachers, they like to shock their listeners with this pretended power that they don't actually have. And they use great swelling words, right? Now, the ultimate blasphemer is going to be the Antichrist. Now, blasphemy just means to slander. Normally, the context will be blaspheming God, but in Revelation 13, it's pretty specific. The beast, or we call him the Antichrist, same person, it says in Revelation 13, 5 and 6, and he, the beast, was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. That's the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. In other words, other angelic beings and saints, because, he's the ultimate false teacher, right, when he shows up. But to create the persona, in a sense, that these false teachers are filled with power and control, all these spiritual forces, they speak evil of them because they really have no comprehension of that which they're dealing with. They blaspheme Satan, many false teachers, as if they control him, but they don't. People do not have control over the devil, okay? The devil is before God, actually accusing us day and night, we're told. But he can only be in one place at one time. And, false teachers have a tendency to just speak in a way where these great swelling words that they have make them sound as if they have this great power and this, mighty authority. And a lot of times they're speaking it against these demonic forces or some other forces or whatever. But, one of the things that I've noticed is that Jesus, the Son of God, and the apostles, they never blasphemed angelic beings. Even the devil, they didn't do that. The 70, when they were sent out in Luke 10, they come back and they were rejoicing. They said, to the Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name, right? Now, they weren't running after them, but if they were there, they could not prevent their ministry if they were getting in the way. And notice Jesus even said, don't rejoice in that, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. There's a focus here, right? Now, years ago, in the 90s, we were on a local radio station, Christian radio station, and so at the time, one of my responsibilities was dropping off cassette tapes of recordings. So we had to take the Bible studies that we recorded and, do like a voice introduction. It was very manual. I used to do it at night after work. And so, and then you had to put music to it and everything. And it was pretty tricky because we didn't really have computers to do it. It was all manual with a little soundboard and like 3 tape decks, and it was kind of crazy. But anyways, so, at one point I was dropping off some cassette tapes at this radio station, and there was a worker there that I had never met before. And I got talking to him. I forget what the details of the conversation was, but I think I had asked him where he went to church, and, he said it was in Boston. And I remember him saying that because I had said that I knew the neighborhood that he was in, and I said, well, that's a tough place, to minister, because a lot of urban settings are. And he said, well, that's where the devil is. And he says, and I'm after him, and I'm looking for him, and I'm going to get him, and all this stuff. And I was thinking, I'm not really interested in that. I said, well, the Bible doesn't really tell us to go after Satan. And he said, he said, I'm not afraid of him. And he was just all rambunctious and everything. And I kind of chalked it up to maybe the fact that he was a new believer that went to a Pentecostal church that wasn't teaching him so well. But anyways, look, I'm not interested in running after Satan or any other demonic being. We're not instructed to do that. Now, if they get in our way for what the Lord is having us do, then we certainly have authority over them. But that kind of instruction to like go after them, it's not in the Gospels, it's not in the Acts, and it's not in the letters, the epistles. One of the ways that you know something is a biblical doctrine or practice is you see it introduced in the Gospels in some fashion, even in principle. You see it worked out in the book of Acts, which is really the model for New Testament church and ministry. And then you see it taught, in other words, explained in the epistles. So if it's introduced in the Gospels, it's, you see it happening in the book of Acts. And again, remember, Acts is a narrative. It's a historical narrative. It's describing what happened. It's not all prescription. It's description. So most of it is description, saying, Luke is telling us this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Now, within the context of some description, there may be prescription because, somebody's giving a sermon, and if the sermon is accountable to either Christians or non-Christians or whatever, everything has to be taken into its context. But Acts is a narrative. It's a historical narrative. And then you get into the epistles where Paul is dealing with, and, Peter, like we're reading here, and John, Jude, James. They're writing specifically to address certain issues in different churches, which, though they're not written to our church today, they are written to Christians, so we can take application like we're doing as walking through this chapter in 2 Peter, to try to somehow apply what Peter is saying to what we're dealing with currently, right? But we have to kind of work our way there. And we certainly don't want to be practicing something that is not in the Gospels, Acts, or the epistles, right? Now, we're not to run from spiritual warfare, but we're not supposed to seek it out either. We're not on a mission to go after the devil. We're on a mission to go after unbelievers. In the church, we're to build up believers, and then out of the church, we're to try to reach unbelievers. In the process of dealing with believers in the church or unbelievers out of the church, there's going to be spiritual warfare, but we're not creating it or looking for it. However, we don't shy away from it. We deal with it as it comes. And it's like anything. I mean, you're in the process of doing your job, and somebody tries to maybe prevent you from doing it. Well, you don't just say, okay, I'm not going to work there anymore. You still try to do what you're being paid to do. And, if you have a difficult employee or you have some other problem, then there are means and ways to deal with it. Other than, like, you don't go to work to look for the difficult employees and try to deal with them. You're being paid to do your job. Well, the Lord has us in a call. We're called to do certain things. We focus on that. Try not to, that's why the book of Nehemiah is so good in leadership and everything else. I mean, Nehemiah, he was laser focused and would not be deterred from the mission that God had him on. And that's what we should do too. Now, also, Nehemiah had the demonic attacks, the spiritual attacks, attacks from within, attacks from without, the whole thing, personal attacks. And, read the book of Nehemiah. You'll see how he dealt with that, because that's how we're supposed to deal with it. We can take that in principle right there, because Nehemiah did a great job. He was not after the bad guys, but when the bad guys came, he dealt with them using the authority that God had given him through prayer, and also by doing everything he could to stay the course. So that's what we're supposed to do. Now, Jude said Michael the archangel didn't blaspheme Satan, but said the Lord rebuke you. Now, again, I hear these sometimes these TV preachers, and they are speaking directly to Satan. They're blaspheming him. They're blaspheming other demonic beings, and really makes me cringe. And I try not to actually hear any of the stuff but sometimes, you're flipping the channel, you go by it, and even in just a few seconds, you hear like some of these nutty guys just kind of going off. They exercise no power and authority. It doesn't matter how much they yell, what they say, and shake their fist, and use boastful words to impress their audience. Even though they're on Christian television, does not mean that they are doctrinally sound. Now, cults are obvious in this way, but those inside the church, in other words, if you're dealing with a cult, well, they're a cult, and you already know, like, they're already unbiblical, and they're off doctrinally. But those inside the church that are among Christians are the most dangerous, because sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to discern. Now, in verse 13, Peter will say, while they feast with you. Jude is more expressive in reference to that, saying these are spots in your love feasts while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. Again, they're in it for themselves. There's some benefit and value that they are deriving from the saints. These false teachers will look like genuine believers, otherwise Christians wouldn't accept them. They talk the talk, they pretend to care. They obviously don't care if they're trying to fleece God's flock instead of feed them. And they deceive by various teachings that they give. And they target the immature and the unstable, those that don't know the word very well, which is why we should be learning it. While at the same time, they do it ultimately really to serve themselves. And look, some of them are tough to figure out because, they're very nice, they have great personalities and all that, do a lot of smiling and complimenting and everything else. But that doesn't mean what they're teaching is biblical. Quite frankly, I'm amazed at what passes for Christianity today. I understand within the ranks of progressive Christianity, that's easy to kind of pick out because they're liberal. 100 years ago, they would have been considered just liberals that are not saved, that don't believe the Bible. But, look, you got to beware when somebody starts changing the Bible or mythologizing it or allegorizing it and making it say something that it's not obviously and plainly saying. The antennas should go up, and you should be aware that you could be in front of somebody that, if not a genuine false teacher, at least is teaching you something in an area that maybe you should not be listening to them. Verse 12, but these, like natural brute beasts, talking about animals, right, made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption. Not good, right? So speaking evil of things they don't understand is part of the boastful speech that they're known for. I find it interesting in whether it's in politics or religion, the biggest boasts of people many times are made regarding things they don't understand. In marketing, Madison Avenue spends a lot of time creating marketing, ads to try to attract people for things. And it's interesting because oftentimes they will take a weakness in a product and actually use that, try to turn it around as the product's strength. So people get deceived by that because they they see the product advertised, and so where they're looking for the weakness is in the area that's not, the product's strength advertised, but yet sometimes what's advertised and what's focused on is the actual weakness, and it's kind of like the best defense is a good offense. So again, you got to watch out for that stuff. But throughout history, like the rise in communist dictators and despots these guys were well known for their boastful speeches. Castro, for example, Fidel Castro, right? He rose to power by promising to restore democratic rights that had existed in Cuba before 1952. So, he was trying to fight Batista's dictatorship, and so he made these promises. He promised to make the already great medical system free and universal. In other words, look, no medical system in any country is perfect, but there are better ways to do it, and there are, unproductive ways to do it. People don't like the amount of money that they pay for health insurance in this country, and I don't think any of us are excited about that. However, we pay a lot, and sometimes it may not be justified, but we pay a lot. But we also get the best treatment that's available in the world, right? So people from all over the world come to the U.S. For medical care. Now, if you put that in the hands of the government, because the government says, hey, we'll have like universal health care for everybody, just go look at the nations that they did that. They come here for medical care. Why? Because once you have government-run health care, it's a lottery system. You have X number of slots, but this many people that need the procedure done. And it's decided who gets into those slots by bureaucrats. So right now, where you may pay, some high fees for your medical insurance, you can go to the doctor and get something addressed. If you're in a country where medical insurance is run by the government, then a bureaucrat says, well, we have X number of slots, this number of people, so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to pick the people that are younger, the ones that are more productive, that feed into the system. They'll develop all this criteria. So then essentially the people that are older and that had labored their entire life to create, that country and give those people jobs that are now making those decisions, they'll be left out in the cold. So a lot of people will come here for, medical attention and everything. Cuba had a medical system that was working. It wasn't the best in the world, but it was working. And Castro said, we'll make it free and universal. It's just like a lot of people complain about, capitalism. Now, I think that, it would take an easy look at history for you to realize that anything other than capitalism is a bad choice. Socialism doesn't work. Socialistic countries are broke. They don't work. If you go, if I used to work at a technology company, we had a guy come down from Canada that was moving here. And one of the reasons he was moving here was because he said they take over 50% of my salary because government-run healthcare is so expensive. And I need a procedure done that it's not going to happen up there. So he had to move to the U.S., become, a citizen and all that so that he could get some healthcare, basically. And, I have a friend that, had a problem. They were living in another country over in Europe and needed something addressed. They got into that lottery system. They were a few slots out. took them 6 months to get an appointment to get something addressed that, had it been cancer and not benign, they would have died. So, it's just, it's amazing that the things that people do not know. And capitalism allows people to thrive, though it's not a perfect system. It works. It's actually more biblical. Socialism is not biblical. Communism certainly isn't biblical. Look, in communism, the government owns everything, and the elites run it, and everybody else has nothing, and they're just worker bees that are slaves to serve the elite. In socialism, it becomes essentially the same thing. The difference is that the government that manages all this stuff just tell all the people that it's yours, like everybody's sharing it. The problem is that, again, why would I work a ton of hours, sacrifice my family, maybe family time, to make my widgets and build my company so that I can create jobs for people and be successful, if they're just going to take all my profit away and give it to some bum that's just kind of hanging around wanting welfare? Well, that doesn't work real well. So that demotivates everybody. At least in capitalism, you get to own what you make. It's yours. Now, certainly the government tries to still take it away when you have, problematic administrations in. But the point is that at least in a capitalistic system, you can thrive. You can work and thrive. No one thrives in socialism. No one thrives in communism. It is the killing of a country. Just look around, do a little reading in history, look around the world today. I mean, why do you think that, that Brexit was a big issue? Because, Britain wanted to exit the EU because they were propping it up because all the different countries that were run with socialized government were broke. And so, they were artificially propping them up because they were more financially viable. And it's like, why should they prop them all up? We'll get out of this. I mean, this stuff is so simple, at least to understand it and to, I hear these millionaires say, oh, communism is a great thing, or Marxism. And it's like, Marxism? It's like, Marx came up with a system. He never even worked. Karl Marx, he married some rich lady and just, wrote and developed his ideas and didn't like capitalism. And people read that nonsense and think, oh, we're going to have a perfect world. Everybody will have nothing and they'll all be happy. Again, you can't fix stupid, but, ignorance can be rectified. Anyways, this is what Castro said. He also said he was going to end race discrimination, restore land ownership, the rights to Cubans, and invite foreign investment. Every single promise was a lie. And the Cubans quickly fell under a communist regime, which Castro specifically claimed he would not do. He said he would not make the country communist. And of course, that's the very thing that he did. Religious false teachers, they have the same type of boastful, lying words, only in a spiritual sense. They make big claims with unstable Christians, and unstable Christians end up following them because in their desperation, they want what these false teachers are promising. Why do you think, I asked the question to myself, why would people go to a church where the pastor is, the main focus is money, which immediately would identify them as a false teacher, and and then they're fleecing their flock? Well, because the people in the flock, they want to be wealthy like the leader. And there's something in them. They figure that they, the Bible's all about, financial gain. And that's like the main deal And so they bought into that, and for them, the gospel's a business, and the people that are coming, they want part of that business. I mean, that's really the issue, because otherwise there's no reason to be there. But unfortunately, they are following those who will utterly perish, Peter says, in their own corruption. The Complete Biblical Library says this about that verse. Indulgence in pride, self-will, contempt for authority, which might be called sins of the spirit, often lead to indulgence in sins of the flesh. Peter said these false teachers act as mere animals born for capture and destruction. Their real desire is to satisfy their physical passions and get material gain. This verse is almost identical with Jude 10. Jude says they speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts. In those things they corrupt themselves. In their destroying, they themselves shall be utterly destroyed. This is often the fate of evil men. Those who choose such a life eventually discover that in the end, even that in which they found pleasure fails to satisfy. That's the Complete Biblical Library. Albert Barnes says, their views will be the means of their ruin, and they render them fit for it just as much as the fierce passions of the wild animals do. The Believer's Bible Commentary says they will be destroyed in the same destruction as the animals. Since they choose to live like animals, they will die like them. Their death will not mean extinction, but they will die ingloriously and without hope. And finally, the College Press Commentary, the one from the 1960s, says the condemnation and eternal misery of these men was as certain as the capture and slaughter of beasts. They shall, in their destroying, also be destroyed. Who were they destroying, corrupting, or bringing into worse condition? Their followers. Their disciples were becoming inferior, lower, and rotten spiritually and morally because of the false teachers' corrupting influence. So, on to verse 13. He says, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. There are spots and blemishes carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with you. Will receive the wages of unrighteousness is really, it's translated by Phillips in his paraphrase. He says, their wickedness has earned them an evil end, and they will be paid in full. It's kind of the idea behind that. Now, the word pleasure is the word we get hedon from, and it means gratification, right? A hedon is somebody that just gratifies their carnal desires and whatever they want. As used in the New Testament, it's descriptive of those who are slaves to pleasure, especially sensual pleasure. Now, where most people wait until the evening to carouse, in other words, go into these self-indulgent lifestyles of reveling in luxury. Listen, when I wasn't saved and I was bouncing in nightclubs, in my early 20s, that's what I used to watch, I mean, that was the scene back in the late 70s, early 80s. But these people can't wait for the nighttime. And it's such a part of their lives that it just goes 24 hours a day, and it's a constant self-gratification. Now, Peter says there's spots and blemishes. That is a metaphorical statement of their immorality. The College Press Commentary says this, these are picture words which show defects of character. The first, a spot or stain, would picture a moral blemish. Instead of wearing clean and pure garments, his are splattered with sin. The second word, a blemish or blot was used by the classical Greek poets and later prose writers in the sense of blame, insult, and disgrace. These men, because of their licentious behavior, were disgraces to society and certainly to Christianity. Peter says they're carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with you. And that provides the indication as to how they operate with their self-indulgence. In other words, social engagements with Christians are an easy way to avoid scrutiny and proper examination of beliefs, right? Because it's just a social setting. A church context where there's no Bible teaching or doctrinal analysis, it's the easiest way for wolves to ingratiate themselves into a Christian community because it's based on personality. Today, it would be difficult for a heretic to worm their way into a church fellowship that taught the Bible in a systematic manner. So they take advantage of TV and social media to do it because there isn't any rebuttal claims when they're doing that, right? They love interviews and talk shows because it brings a comfort to the audience. It lowers the audience guard, creates an attraction to the person, and then once you accept the person, it goes to their teaching. Because you like the person, you want to like what they say, and as long as it's not too far off, it's like, well, and so, they're given every kind of grace opportunity until they say something really bad, which oftentimes they don't. But if they do, sometimes that's even overlooked because, well, most of what they say is good. It's crazy. This is backwards. And unfortunately, it is part of our current Christian culture because many Christians, quite frankly, are word poor. There's a lot of exciting things to do, and a lot of Christians don't find studying the Bible exciting, even though it's the thing that's going to change their life. Now, personally, I do find the study of the Bible exciting. I've been doing it since 1982, but a lot of people don't. And I think that, unfortunately, it's their loss, and it can get them in trouble. Now, many Bible teachers are examined by the quality of their presentation, not what's presented. Like, for example, I'm just talking to you here. I know I'm not overly exciting. I'm not this big dynamic speaker. I'm trying to help you understand what Peter the Apostle is teaching in 2 Peter. So I'm doing my best to walk through it in a manner that hopefully is understandable and just talk to you. So I know that, the actual presentation isn't, with great cinematic effects and all this other stuff. But, I don't have a team of people working here to promote me to, nor do I want to, but, so that I can create a big business out of it. And so, I'm not on television and all that other stuff. So, which is fine. Being on television doesn't make you a false teacher, but there are a lot of them on there. The problem that I'm trying to focus on in the video addicted generation that we live in, how a topic is presented becomes the evaluation for truth for many people, not what is presented. In other words, if it's a great presentation, they say, well, it's got to be true. Well, that's crazy. It's not how it's presented, it's what's presented, right? The presentation today is evaluated for truth, not the substance of the presentation, but it's really the substance that is the important thing. It's a very tragic situation, unfortunately, that we're in, and the consequences in the church today end up being a doctrinally lethargic and anemic spiritual people. I don't know, there's no other way to swing that, because they're not growing. There was more of an advantage over 100 years ago when we didn't have all the media and the easy access to a ton of information, because what gets the kind of top billing is not based on truth. It's based on like, and like has nothing to do with truth. Truth is not established by popular vote, or desire or anything else. Truth is objective, and when we're dealing with the truth of the Bible, it either is or it isn't true. It is or it isn't biblical, and the evaluation needs to be made based on its alignment with Scripture, not on whether the guy is dressed great, presents great, talks great, is funny, has a little bit of humor, some of the psychology, and all this other stuff that they work very hard on to analyze how to capture an audience. That is not what makes for truth. Look, here's the reality. Most cultists can twist the average Christian into a pretzel in 5 minutes. No wonder those who teach more truth mixed with some of this poison in false teaching that have kind of wormed their way into the church are so easily tolerated. Look, if somebody outside Christianity can confuse a lot of Christians because they're just word poor and they're not confident in their own beliefs, well, what do you think's going to happen when somebody that comes along and gives them 75% of the truth so that they can give them 25% poison, and they do it in a manner that, is the great speech and the big words and the power and authority and everything else, well, they're going to fall for it hook, line, and sinker, unfortunately. So 2 Peter chapter 4, Paul says in verse 3, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine," talking about the church, "but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears," they want to hear something new and exciting all the time, "they will heap up," that means to gather together, "for themselves teachers, and they will turn aside their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables." The word fables is mythos. We get the word myths from it. Something that's a myth is not real. Now, unfortunately, we've reached the time that Paul talked about in spades, which is why at the end of each of these videos, I tell you the same thing. And I'll say it once again until the next one, which is we'll pick up in verse 17 next time. But until then, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.